Today we would like to talk about chapter 4, the market forces of supply and demand. Okay, so this could be one of the most important chapter in this class, okay, supply and demand model. So let's look at there are several questions we try to find the answers in this chapter. The first one could be what factors might affect buyers' demand for goods? And then we'd like to talk about what factors might affect sellers' supply of goods. After we learn demand and supply, then how do demand and supply determine the price of the goods and quantity in the market? How do changes in the demand and supply shifters will affect the market price and the quantity of the product? Okay, so there are several questions we try to find the answers in this chapter. Now let's begin with the first one, market. We actually we actually have a very brief introduction about market definition in chapter 1, right? So market is a group of economic agents who are trading goods and services based on some rules and regulations. And a market may have a physical location or not. So for example, the farmer markets, Saturday farmer markets or some like Wednesday farmer markets, or like a grocery store in flat mile, like the Costco. Okay, so it could be like the physical location, or it could not be. For example, the online shopping platform, Amazon, Walmart.com, Macy's.com. Okay, those are the very popular trading platform. And in this chapter, we will focus on competitive market. So a competitive market is one with many buyers and sellers, and both of these parts, okay, has very small impact on the price of the goods, or we can say their impact on the price of the goods are neglected. Okay, so in a perfectly competitive market, actually this perfectly competitive market doesn't exist. Okay, however, in order to make our analyze more easier, okay, much easier, then we would like to assume market is perfectly competitive. It will have several characteristics. For example, all goods are exactly the same, identical goods, okay? Buyers and sellers are there is many buyers and sellers, so no one can impact the price of the good. Both of these two sides will call price taker, okay? So they are just the price taker. In this chapter, we will assume markets are perfectly competitive. This is just for easier analyze, okay? There are some examples of competitive market commodity. For example, agricultural commodities such as soybean, wheat, corn, okay? Because it will have many buyers and sellers, and we can assume those goods are very similar, right? Also, there are some examples of imperfect markets. So, for example, in our local area, we probably will have only one or two internet provider like Xfinity, right? Or like a CenturyLink. So those two companies probably the only two providers in our local area. And we were to say if these two countries agree to increase their internet speed, then we have no choice. We have to pay them for that unless you will not use internet, right? And you can also see for the electricity provider in our local area will be the consumer price. Sorry for the this consumer power incorporation. So if this company decided to increase the price, then we still need to pay the actual money to use the electricity, right? So we like to say those two companies, they actually has power to affect the market price. Then their markets are not competitive. And we will learn those imperfect markets in later chapter, maybe in chapter 15, chapter 16, okay? So from this slide on, we assume a model of perfectly competitive market to study supply and demand model. And then we would like to study two sides of the market, supply side of the market, demand side of the market. Then let's first begin with the demand side. So demand, the very first concept will be quantity demand. Okay, the quantity demanded of the goods is the amount of the goods that buyers are willing and able to purchase. Okay, so there are two conditions. Buyers are willing and able to purchase. The law of the demand will tell us the quantity demand of the goods would decreases when the price increases, other things being equal. So we would like to say if the price increase, if the product price increase, the quantity demand would decrease, right? If the price decrease, then the quantity demand will increase. So this is very easy to explain. When a product's price become cheaper, you probably would like to buy more product, right? And if the product's price is higher, then you'll buy fewer products. So price and quantity demand, they are negatively related, right? And as I told you before, that quantity demand involve two conditions. Buyers are willing and able to purchase, right? This is the gift that my son always asks me to buy for him. Saturn V model from Lego set. You can see from Amazon the price is 119.99 cents, which was really high for me to purchase one gift for my kid. I'm willing to purchase, so I'm able to purchase, but I'm not willing to purchase. Okay, for my son, he's willing to purchase, but however, he is unable to purchase. So we have no quantity demand in this product unless one day during the Black Friday, some year before, I forgot it. Okay, the price decreased to 79.99. I think it's really a good deal for me because my son asked me for this products for couple for some time. Okay, so when the price decrease, my quantity demand increase because now I'm willing and able to purchase. Then finally, my son got this Lego set as his birthday gift. Okay, so you can see from this example, I explained the quantity demand of the goods should be the amount of the goods that the buyers willing and able to purchase. When the price decrease, your quantity demand of the goods increases. Price and quantity demand, they are negatively related. Now let's look at demand schedule. So demand schedule is just a table. Okay, we can put table. It's a table that shows the relationship between the price of the good and the quantity demand. So I will give you an example here. Will show Helen's demand for lattes. The first column on this table will be the price of the latte, right? So when the price of the latte increase zero, then the quantity demand of latte for Helen will be 16 units, right? 16 cups. And then when the price increased to $1, then Helen's quantity demand decreased to 14 units. As the price increased to $6, then Helen's quantity demand of this latte decreased to 4 units. So you can see from this table, okay, it actually satisfies the law of the demand. Price and quantity demand, they are negatively related. And we can also derive for the demand curve based on the demand schedule. So you can see on this graph, okay, I put a quantity of latte on horizontal axis and price of the latte on vertical axis. For the first point, when the price zero, quantity demand of latte for Helen will be 16 units. Okay, you can see the red dots on horizontal axis. When price increased to $1, then the quantity demand of latte decreased to 14, and then it goes on, okay? Until the price increased to $6, you can notice Helen's quantity demand of latte decreased to 4 units. Link those points, okay? Link those points. You can derive for a demand curve. Very important. This demand curve is downward sloping. This demand curve is downward sloping, which shows the price and the quantity demand, they are negatively related. So we have slope is downward for the demand curve. Okay, so this is very important. Our demand curve is downward sloping. Now let's look at market demand versus individual demand. Okay. So this one is very straightforward. Market demand is just the summation of all individual demand at a certain price. Okay. So like to say the quantity demand in a market is just the sum of the individual demand by all buyers at each price. Okay. So assume now there are only two buyers in the market. Okay. Helen and Ken. They are the only two buyers. So this is the demand schedule that's from Helen, as we just showed before. And then I can add one more column, shows you the Ken's quantity demand. Then I will ask you, what about the market demand when a price equals zero? We'll need to do sum these numbers, right? So when a price equals zero, Helen's quantity demand is 16 and Ken's demand will be 8 units. Sum these two numbers, you can get the market demand equal 24, right? And then when the price increased to 1, Helen's quantity demand decreased to 14 and Ken's demand decreased to 7. So you can also sum these two numbers to get the market demand when the price equal $1 will be 21 units, etc. Okay, you can get the market demand at each price, just the summation of all the individual demand at that price. Make sense or not? Yes? Then let's move on to derive for the market demand curve. So based on what we just have from market demand, then we can draw the market demand curve for lattice. Still put the quantity on horizontal axis and price on vertical axis. Then the demand curve is downward sloping. Okay? So let's talk a little bit more about a demand curve. So demand curve is just a two-dimensional graph, but very important things will be here. We always put the price on y-axis. Okay, so the price is on y-axis. Okay, and the quantity demand is on x-axis. Okay. So a change in price would cause a change in quantity demand. So let me show you 2 points here. This is also important, okay? I put a quantity demand on horizontal axis and price on vertical axis. This is the demand curve, okay? So I will mark 2 points. Point A, I have the price P1 and quantity demand equal Q1, okay? I have another point, it's my point B, okay? At point B, I have the price equal P2 and quantity demand equal Q2. Then I would like to say if the price changes, the price of the product changes, it will move along this demand curve, right? So moving from A to B, okay, if just the price changes, only the price of this product changes, okay? So I would like to say here, moving from A to B, moving from A to B, quantity demand increase, right? So we have more quantity demand. And moving from B to A, quantity demand decrease. What's the reason of quantity demand increase or decrease? Price changes. Just the price of the product changes. So the reason behind this movement is, I'll write things here, okay? Only the price of the product changes. Only the price of the product changes will causing a movement, along this demand curve. Okay? So the demand curve here shows how price affects the quantity demand. Other things being equal. I didn't mention other things changes. I just mentioned only the price of the product changes. It will causing a movement either from A to B or from B to A, okay? Moving along this demand curve. So those other things are, what we say, non-price determinants, okay? Those other things are non-price determinants. You can put here non-price determinants. So what are the non-price determinants? For example, your loyalty about one brand, your income level. Your income increase, you might probably buy more products, right? Your income decrease, you might buy fewer products. Or, for example, the loyalty about a brand or your expectations about a brand, okay? So those are what we call non-price determinant. It's not because of the price changes, it's because of other things changes, okay? That would change the demand of the product, not the quantity demand. So this should be very important, okay? Change in non-price determinants would shift demand curve, would shift the demand curve. So this is very, very important. You need to distinguish the movement along demand curve and the shift of the demand curve. So for example, I draw you a graph here. Still, this is the price, this is the quantity, okay? This is the demand curve. I put E1, okay? Demand curve for one product. And this could be a point, okay? Maybe a point A, okay? We have P1, we have Q1. Now we assume your income increase, your income level increase. And this is maybe like the product, like the steak, okay? Like seafood or steak. So we say, okay, now your income increase, you can buy more seafood or steak. Even seafood or steak's price doesn't change because of your income increase. Now probably you can buy more products. You can see A and B, they have the same price, okay? However, now because of your income increase, you can buy more steak or buy more seafood. It will shift, it actually shifts this demand curve outwards, right? Shift this demand curve outwards means the demand increase. So compare with these two graphs. What's the difference? For this graph, what would like to say for this graph is something very important. Okay, I mark here. Quantity, quantity demand changes. Quantity demand changes, and this only related to the price. The price of the product would cause the quantity demand changes. However, other non-price determinants would shift the demand curve. And this, from this part, we would say demand changes. This one, demand changes. So do you see the difference? For this graph, we only have one demand curve, right? And then it has a movement along A or B. This is the quantity demand changes and only related to the price of this product. From this graph, nothing changes in price, but other non-price determinant changes. It will shift the demand curve either outwards or inwards. We will say the demand changes. This is the demand changes related to non-price determinants. Demand changes related to non-price determinants. And then we have multiple demand curve here, right? Understand? This is very important. The shift in demand curve is termed as a change in demand. A change in demand. Okay? So I will have a little bit summarize here. Summary here for the quantity demand. the amount of the goods the buyers are willing and able to purchase, and it negatively related to the price of the product. Demand schedule is just a table, okay, shows the quantity demand and the price, the relationship. And we also can draw demand curve. It's downward sloping, okay? And then we always put the quantity demand on horizontal axis, price on vertical axis. So the type of the change in quantity demand, as I mentioned here, it will only caused by the price of the product itself, okay? Moving from A to B, we have quantity demand increase. Moving from B to A, we have quantity demand decrease, right? This is reflected on this part. Now, the change in demand will be the graph for this part. It will caused by non-price determinant. And then it either can shift to the right-hand side if increasing demand, or it can shift to the left-hand side, decreasing demand. So this two terminology is very important. Change in quantity demand and change in demand. Very different, okay? You need to learn how to distinguish these two concepts. And this will be one of the most important parts in this chapter. Now let's look at what are the demand shifters. So the demand shifters, as I just mentioned before, maybe your income level, your loyalty, your expectations, right? So let's look at those shifters one by one. Price of the related goods. This is not the price of the product itself, okay? It's the price of the related goods. So here we need to learn what are the related goods. So let me see. What are the related goods? In this chapter, we actually will learn two different related goods, okay? The first one will be substitutes. Can you think about some example of substitutes? So if you're shopping online, probably some of your products are not available in the market. Then it will ask you, do you want some substitutions, right? Rather than if the products or orders already out of stock. So substitution or substitutes were the products that might be very similar to the one that you would like to purchase. Okay, so we would like to say products are very similar, then both of them can treat as substitutes. But from economy, we would like to say two goods are substitutes if increase in the price of one good can cause an increase for a demand for another. So let's look at the one of the most common substitutes, Pepsi and Coke. Pepsi and Coke, okay? So let's see if price of Pepsi increase, what will consumer do first? If price of Pepsi increase, what will happen? First, consumers would decrease their quantity demand for Pepsi, right? Make sense or not? Pepsi become the price of Pepsi is higher. The consumers might switch to buy more Coke, right? So here, price of a Pepsi increase, we would like to say the quantity demand of Pepsi decrease, right? That will be a very direct impact on Pepsi's quantity demand. And what happens to Coke? Anything change in Coke price? Nothing change in Coke price, right? It will also has another impact. The demand of Coke increase. So we can notice this demand of the Coke increase is not because of Coke price changes, it's because of Pepsi's price changes. So we would like to say two goods, they are substitutes. If increase in the price of one good will cause an increase of demand for another. So let me draw a graph for you. In this case, I treat this as for Coke, okay? And this is the demand for Coke. This is the price for Coke. This is the original demand curve. And then we assume the Coke price is, let's say, P1, Q1. Anything change in Coke price? Nothing change in Coke price, right? But because of Pepsi price increase, consumers switch to buy more Coke. So it will actually shift the demand curve for Coke to the right hand side, okay, to the right hand side. So we'll say these two goods, they are substitutes. They are substitutes. And can you think about other example of substitutes? For example, we can think about maybe pizzas and hamburger, right? An increase in the price of a pizza will increase demand for hamburger, shifting hamburger's demand curve to which side? Increase the demand for hamburger, then that will shift the hamburger demand curve to the right hand side, okay? Other examples, maybe like Pepsi, Coke, or is that just disappear here? And then you can think about the other examples of substitutes, okay? Like breakfast cereal and waffle, something like that. Now let's look at, this is one type of the related goods. And another type of related goods I would like to talk about today will be complements, okay? Complements. We would like to say two goods are complements if increase in one good will cause a decrease of demand for another good. So this is substitutes. We're finished. Now let's look at the complements, okay? For complements, it would like to say increase the price of one good will cause a decrease of demand for another. I would like to talk about an example of peanut butter and jelly. Okay, so these two things always eating together, right? So for example, if I say peanut butter's price increase, what will happen? It will first directly affect the quantity demand of peanut butter, right? Peanut butters now become price become higher, so the price become higher. Then consumers will buy fewer peanut butter, right? And when consumers consume fewer peanut butter, they might also consume fewer jelly because these two things always eating together. And anything change in jelly's price? Nothing changes in jelly's price. Jelly's demand decrease is because of peanut butter's price increase. So these two products, we treat them as complements. We can also show this one through a graph, okay? So let me see. If I treat this as for jelly, okay? Jelly, and I put the demand on the horizontal axis, price on vertical axis. This is the demand curve one. I have the original demand is point A. Price is P1, this is quantity demand here is Q1, okay? Now, nothing changes in jelly's price. However, because of peanut butter price increase, consumers also buy fewer jelly. So it might shift to this point. You can see here from this graph, nothing changes in jelly's price. Price always fixed at P1, but because of peanut butter's price increase, then we'll have a decrease of demand for jelly. So this is why we say two goods, they are complements. If increase in one good would decrease the demand for another, okay? So examples, we can say the examples like peanut butter and jelly or like cream and bagel, okay, cream cheese and bagel. Sometimes like computers and software or like their frame and lenses, okay, those we can always consume together. So if the price of the computers increase, consumers buy fewer computers and at the same time they will consume fewer software. So it will shift the software demand curve to the left hand side. Now, like eggs and bacons, okay, always eaten together. So the price of the bacons changes will definitely affect the consumption of egg. Now let's look at another demand shifter. So another demand shifter will be income. So I already give you the example of income, right? But income will have different impact on product. Demand for normal goods is positively related to income. What is normal good mean? So normal goods means once your income increase, you would like to buy more of those products like steak, seafood. Yeah, we can treat them as normal goods. When the when the income increase, you buy off more those products. So they are positively related to income. Increase in income will cause increase of demand for those products. There is another type of products is inferior goods. What does inferior good mean? Inferior goods means you have more income, however, you consume fewer of those products. So one of the typical inferior goods would be frozen pizza or like the potato. So once your income increase, you probably would like to consume the fresh pizza rather than frozen pizza, and you will consume other vegetables rather than potatoes. Okay, so inferior goods is the demand of inferior goods is negatively related to income. An increase in income will shift the demand curve for inferior goods to which side? To the left hand side. Okay, so let me draw a graph for you. If I treat this as normal goods, so for normal goods, this is the demand and this is the price. This is the demand curve. Okay, and I can put point A here, P1, Q1. If your income increase for normal goods, you would like to have more of those products. Even the price doesn't change. You are able to buy more of those products. So it will shift the demand curve actually to the right hand side. So this is the normal goods. For inferior goods, a little bit for inferior goods it's different. Okay, so for inferior goods, then you can see here, I still have the price here, I have the quantity here. This could be original demand curve. Okay. Now this is the points. We can assume this could be like the frozen pizza or like the potato. Okay. P1, Q1. Now your income increase. However, you would like to buy fewer of those products. Okay. So I can put this as point B. When your income increase, actually you buy fewer of those products, it will shift the demand curve of inferior goods to the left hand side, decrease the demand of the inferior goods once your income increases. Okay, so it will shift the demand curve. Understand here? Now let's move on to the next one. Tastes. So people's taste will changes a lot. For example, maybe several years later, I find okay, become vegetarian will be better for my health, so I will decrease the consumption of meat. Even the meat price doesn't change, but my taste changes, right? It will decrease the demand for meat if I become a vegetarian, right? And then at the same time, my consumption of our vegetables will increase. Even vegetables price doesn't change, but I would like to become a vegetarian, which will shift the demand curve of vegetable to the right hand side, right? So taste would definitely shift the demand curve, okay, based on people's preferences. So this is the example of tastes. And then it also has people's expectations. So when your expectations about economy changes, then your consumption about the products will also changes. So for these days, I might have the expectations about the interest rate. So because of the inflation rate now is high, and then we know that the Federal Reserve might also increase the interest rate again. So I can say my if I plan to buy the new car, then my auto loan will increase, right? Based on the interest rate will increase. So this is why I might stop the consumption of the new car at a recent time, right? So that would even the auto car's price doesn't change, but because of my expectations about the economy, it will definitely affect my consumption or my demand for the new cars. So for example, the people expect their income will increase in the future. Then the demand for meals at expensive restaurants might increase now. So for example, I expect that my paycheck will increase. Then the amount of my paycheck will increase next month. So this month's profit I might bring to my kids and then also my husband, okay, to consume our expensive restaurant to celebrate some some holidays together. Okay. So that also would change consumers' demand. Even the meals at expensive restaurant doesn't change. The price doesn't change, but because of my expectation changes, it will also affect my demand for those expensive meals in restaurant. Okay, so you can notice if those non-price determinant changes, it will shift the demand curve, right? We will have multiple demand curves showing here. However, if just the price of the product itself changes, we will only have one demand curve and will move along that demand curve. So I have the summary here. If it's just the price changes, it will cause a movement along the demand curve. And if we have more buyers in the market, then even the price doesn't change, it will also shift the demand curve. Income level will also change the demand curve, okay, shift the demand curve, either to the left hand side or to the right hand side, depending on that product is a normal product or inferior product. The price of the related goods will also shift the demand curve depending on the goods are substitutes or complements. And then consumers' tastes, consumers' loyalty. Sometimes you might also mention the locations, right? So there are other non-price determinants with changes. Here, I just give you some major examples of non-price determinants. Some students mention about the locations, convenience, something like that. Okay, that would definitely affect consumers' demand for that product. Okay, so let's look at one example. Please draw a demand curve for bagel, and then what happens in each of the following scenario. Why? The scenario A, price of the bagel decrease. Scenario B, the price of the toast decrease. Scenario C, the price of the cream cheese decrease. Okay, so let's look at how we can apply the summary that I just told you to draw a demand curve based on these three examples. The first one, bagel's price decrease. So what we need to do first is to draw a demand curve for bagel, okay? Okay. I put a price here, I put a quantity here. Demand curve for bagel downward sloping, right? And then I can mark one point. Point A, the price P1, the quantity demand Q1. Now bagel's price decrease to P2. And then you can find out the corresponding point on this demand curve and find the new quantity demand. So when the price decrease, the quantity demand of bagel will increase. Okay, so this will be for for scenario A. Now let's look at scenario B, what will happen. price, demand. This is the demand curve for bagel. And we have the original point, okay? Point A. The price of a bagel, P1, the quantity of the bagel, Q1. Now it says the price of the toast decrease. Toast and bagel, what's the relationship between toast and bagel? We can treat them as substitutes, right? So if toast become cheaper, first consumers can buy more toast, right? And at the same time, even bagel's price doesn't change, consumers' consumption about bagel will decrease, right? So it will decrease the demand for bagel. Then we would like to say at this point, even bagel's price doesn't change, but because of toast price decrease, consumers now will buy fewer bagel. You will shift the demand curve to the left hand side. Okay? Now let's look at next one. Scenario C. The price of the cream cheese decrease. Cream cheese and bagel, what's the relationship? They always be eaten together, right? So if the cream cheese price become cheaper, consumers can buy more cream cheese, right? So what happens here? This is price, this is the quantity, this is the demand for. This is the original demand for bagel, okay? This is the price P1, Q1. Let's just continue. If the cream cheese price become cheaper, consumers buy more cream cheese, and at the same time, they probably will also buy more bagel, right? So even bagel's price doesn't change, but because of cream cheese price become cheaper, consumers now also would like to buy more bagel. So it will shift the demand curve to the left right hand side. Okay, so those are the three examples for this question. Any other questions for this part? If you have other questions, you might referring to actual credit video because I explained the practice question in that part as well. Now let's look at supply side. So for supply side, things will be very similar to what we just introduced about demand side. Okay. So for supply side, what we need to do first is quantity supply. So quantity supply of any goods is the amount of the goods that sellers are willing and able to offer. Okay. The law of the supply will tell us when the price of the products become higher, sellers would like to offer more of those products, right? So the quantity supply of the good increases when the price of the goods increases, other things being equal. So here you can see price increase, quantity supply increase. If price become cheaper, then sellers has no motivation to offer more products. So they are actually price and quantity demand, they are positively related, right? This part. Positively related. The supply schedule, very similar to what we talk about in demand side. It's just a table, okay, and it shows the relationship between the price of the goods and quantity supply. Example here, I give you an example of Starbucks supply of latte. So you can notice when the latte's price equals zero, Starbucks is not willing to offer any lattes. When the price increase to $1, it can offer 3 units. When the price increase to $6, then Starbucks would like to offer 18 units. Okay, so you can see as the price increase, the quantity supply increase as well. So this supply schedule actually satisfy the law of the supply, right? And based on this, we can also draw a supply curve. So you can see here on this two-dimensional graph, okay, I put the quantity on the horizontal axis and price on vertical axis. So we can just mark those points on this graph. When the price 0, no lattes will be available from Starbucks. When price increase to 1, then 3 units of latte will be available. And then as the price increase, Starbucks would like to offer more lattes. So you can see, link those two dots, you can have the supply curve, which is upward trend, right? So we have upward slope for the supply curve. And then let's move on to talk about market supply. So for this part, I will talk a little bit more faster because we already spent time to talk about demand side. So for a market supply, it's just the summation of all the individual supply at each price. And then here we can see the example. We assume now there are two sellers of lattes in the market, Starbucks and Peet's. Okay, only these two sellers. The first two column is just the supply schedule that we see from Starbucks. Then I add one more. Okay, I can see the Dutch Bros or like a Peet's. So the Dutch Bros here very similar. When price equals 0, there is no lattes will be available in Dutch Bros. When price increase to $1, Dutch Bros would like to offer 2 units, etc. So may I know when the price equals 0, what's the market supply? You just need to add 0 and 0, right? So when price equals 0, no lattes will be available in the market. When price increase to $1, Starbucks would like to offer 3 units, Dutch Bros would like to offer 2 units. Then totally the market supply will be 5 units. Okay, so etc. You can see as price increase, then the market supply also increase. Okay, so you can see when the price increased to $6, Starbucks would like to offer 18 units and Dutch Bros would like to offer 12 units. So totally the market supply of lattes will be 30 units when the price increased to $6. So you can see based on the market supply, you can also draw a market supply curve for latte, and which is still upward trend. Okay. Now a little bit summarize about supply side. The quantity supply measures the amount of the goods that sellers are willing and able to offer at each price, right? The supply schedule is just a table, okay, which will shows the relationship between the price and quantity supply. And then the supply curve will just show you the upward trend supply curve between price and the quantity supply. Okay. Now, very similar to non-price determinants. Okay, in supply side, we're also like to talk about supply curve shifters. So except for the price of the product, okay, the price of product will only affect the supply, the quantity supply. If there is other things changes, for example, labor cost changes, even the market price doesn't change, then the sellers might change their supply of the goods, right? So the supply curve shows how price affects the quantity supply, other things being equal. Those other things are what we call non-price determinants. And then one of the most important non-price determinants will be cost, okay? So change in those non-price determinants will actually shift the supply curve. If the supply increase, then the supply curve will shift to the right-hand side. If the supply decrease, it will shift the supply curve to the left-hand side. Let me draw you the graph, okay? So let me draw you the graph here. This will be change in quantity supply. Change in quantity supply, okay? Price, quantity. Supply curve, upward trend. This is supply curve. I mark 2 points, okay? Point A, P1, Q1. Point B here, P2, Q2. What's the difference between these A and B? So compare with A and B, you can say, moving from A to B, okay, I'll just say here, moving from A to B. What happens? Quantity supply increase. Moving from B to A, quantity supply decrease. So you can see from A to B or from B to A is because of the price of the product changes. So this one only cost, this one only caused by the price of this product. Okay? This is what we say, the change in quantity supply only caused by the price of this product. If there are other things happens, what will happen to the supply curve? So we will say if there are other non-price determinant changes, it will shift the supply curve. Okay, so let me give you one example. This is the price, this is the quantity, this is the supply curve. I can mark 1 point on the supply curve, okay? Nothing changes in the price of this product. However, because of now the cost of production decrease, the cost of the production decrease, so even the market price doesn't change, the sellers might find it more profitable to sell more products, right? So even the price doesn't change, but because of the cost decrease, then the sellers would like to offer more products. It will shift this supply curve to the right hand side if supply increase. Okay, so this one will be the changes in supply. Change in supply only caused by non-price determinants. Okay, only caused by non-price determinants. It's not because of the price changes. You can see the price still at P1. But to look at this graph, the change in quantity supply, we have different price level. Okay? Make sense or not here? You can see the movement from A to B, as I was saying, from the change in quantity supply, or the movement from B to A only caused by the price of this product. Then the change in supply also were caused by non-price determinants. And then it might shift the supply curve to the right-hand side if supply increase, or shift the supply curve to the left-hand side if supply decrease. Okay, so any questions about this part? Very similar to demand side, okay? Now let's move on to talk about supply shifters. As I mentioned, that one of the most important supply shifter will be cost. Okay, so let's look at the first one, input prices. So the input prices including the wages, the price of the raw materials. Okay, we can treat all those as input prices. So if the input prices decrease, which means the cost decrease, right? So even the market price doesn't change, the sellers would like to offer more of those products, and which will definitely increase the supply. Okay, so the input price or the cost decrease, sellers would like to offer more goods, which will shift the supply curve to their right hand side. So here we assume we assume the milk price decrease. Milk is one of the inputs for latte, right? So if milk price decrease, then sellers would like to offer more lattes because it's more profitable now, even the market price doesn't change. So it will shift this supply curve to the right hand side. Now let's look at technology. Technology, here we will focusing on cost saving technology. So for cost saving technology, it will also make the production become more profitable, and then it will shift the supply curve to the right hand side. The number of the sellers. If there are more sellers in the market, then what will happen? Even the price doesn't change, more sellers available in the market means more products will be available. So we also shift the supply curve to the right hand side. And if there are fewer sellers, it will shift the supply curve to the left hand side. Okay. So a decrease in the number of sellers would decrease the supply at the same time, shift the supply curve to the left hand side. Okay, for the second sentence. Now the expectations. Not only consumers will have expectations in the market, sellers will also have the expectations for the market. So expectations will definitely affect the supply curve. For example, some events happen in Middle East will lead to the expectations of higher oil prices. Then what will happen? If sellers of the crude oil notice this type of expectations, okay, they would definitely cut down the current of crude oil supply and put those crude oil into inventory and sell them in the future for higher price. Okay, so in the response, owners of this Texas oil fields will reduce the supply currently and then save their crude oil into future into the inventory and then maybe sell them at a higher price in the future. So that will shift the supply curve of the crude oil to the left hand side. So in general, okay, we will say sellers might adjust the supply when their expectations of the future product changes. But we mean here is goods are not perishable. Okay, like the meat, probably it will not just put it in the inventory for like fresh meat will not put it in the inventory for a long time. However, for crude oil, of course, you can definitely put it in the inventory for a certain period of time, right? So let's look at the summary. In the supply side, okay, if just the price changes, it will definitely it will definitely cause a movement along the supply curve. However, if there are other non-price determinants such as input prices, technology, number of the sellers, or sellers' expectations, all those, okay, would definitely shift the supply curve. Okay, so let's look at one example. So this example tell you to first draw a supply curve of tax return preparation software, maybe the TurboTax, and then what happens in each of the following scenarios. The first one, retailers cut the price of the software. Technological advance or allows the software to be produced at lower price. And then for last scenario, professional tax return preppers increase the price of the services they offer. So what are those scenarios will change the supply curve? Let's look at the first one. Retailers cut the price of the software. So look at A. This is the price of the tax return software. This is the quantity. This is the supply curve. Originally, let's assume it will be at this point. Okay, point A, we have the price equal P1, quantity equal Q1. But now the price of this software decrease to P2. So what will happen? It will decrease the quantity supply of this product. Okay, so decrease. quantity supply. Decrease quantity supply of this tax return preparation software. Now let's look at B, okay? For scenario B, what happens? Advanced technology can allow the software to be produced at lower cost. So this one doesn't mention anything change in software's price. This is price, this is quantity. Original software supply curve, okay? And then that's marked point A. Price P1, quantity equal Q1. Now the cost decrease, which means even the market price doesn't change, it might become more profitable to sell more tax return software, right? So sellers or the suppliers of software would like to offer more products, even the price doesn't change. So we might shift the supply curve to the right hand side. Now let's look at the last one. Professional tax return preppers increase the price of the service they can offer. First, can you tell me what's the relationship between tax return software and tax return preppers? What the relationship between them? They are competitors, right? We can treat them as substitutes. So this part would definitely affect the demand curve of tax return preparation software, not the supply curve. So in scenario C, nothing will changes in the supply curve of this tax return preparation software. Okay, up to now, it will be the first part of this chapter because this chapter is pretty intensive. So I divided the contents into two parts. So next slide, next part, I would like to talk about when the market demand and supply happens together, what would what would be the result for the equilibrium? Okay, so we will learn that part in the next slides. Thank you.